Hello and welcome. My name is Avik Guha, and I'll be moderating today's Washington University East End Transformation Virtual Alumni event. I'm a 2012 alumnus of the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts and the McKelvey School of Engineering. Thank you to our fellow alumni, parents, staff, and friends of WashU for joining today's special presentation. Our diverse audience is tuning in from coast to coast across 16 states. I'm excited to virtually welcome you as a co-chair alongside Matt Bernstein of the WashU Built Environment Network, the Colorado-specific WashU Real Estate Network. I'd like to quickly review our format. Only our presenters and myself will have active video and audio. We encourage you to participate by asking questions at any time by typing a question into the Q&A box. We'll do our best to address as many questions as possible near the end. We hope this informative event will provide you a nostalgic trip back to WashU campus and a glimpse into the future for many generations of WashU students to come. More than a construction project, the East End transformation of the Danforth campus sets the stage for the next era of learning at Washington University, adding several new buildings, expanding the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum, and providing a refreshed landscape social lawn over an airy underground parking garage. The East End features many sustainable design elements that contributed to LEED Platinum certification of 4 new buildings and the first gold-level bicycle-friendly university designation in the state of Missouri. In August 2019, I was coincidentally visiting St. Louis and got to witness the impact of this transformed built environment on students and their visiting families on the first day of classes. Being an architect, I spent several hours exploring, awestruck and jealous of the students that day. Many of our alumni and parents have not had the opportunity to visit campus since its completion, so we're virtually bringing the East End transformation to you. Today, our 3 speakers will provide a behind-the-scenes perspective of this massive undertaking and share more about the project planning, goals, and construction. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the WashU Alumni Association YouTube page next week. It's now my honor to introduce James Kolker, Jane Kojima, and Phil Valco. James Kolker, FAIA, is the Associate Vice Chancellor and University Architect at Washington University in St. Louis. He's responsible for stewardship of the university's campuses, leadership of campus planning, and design and development of all capital projects from renovations to new facilities. He provides strategic vision and is a leader of the core facilities team who address the operations and maintenance of all university facilities. In 2018, James was named a fellow to the American Institute of Architects. Jane Kojima is the Director of Communications for Facilities, Planning, and Management at Washington University in St. Louis. She's responsible for strategies to ensure the effective dissemination of information for strategic priorities and projects. Prior to joining WashU in 2017 as Communications Manager for the East End Transformation Project, Kojima lived in New York City, where she worked for organizations focused on quality of life in neighborhoods through community improvement and economic development. And Phil Valco, who is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Sustainability at Washington University in St. Louis. Phil works with faculty, staff, and students to advance operational sustainability for WashU and to foster the next generation of climate leaders. Phil also leads and participates in national and regional partnerships to accelerate climate action and sustainable practice, including serving as the program chair for the Midwest Climate Summit and serving on the University Climate Change Coalition Steering Committee. Now, please join me in welcoming James Kolker, Jane Kojima, and Phil Valco.
Thank you for the introduction. We're so happy to be here today. It was funny in hearing the reference to the first day of school in 2019. We too were thinking about that. It was a very happy day on campus. And we're going to start with sharing a video from that first day of classes, welcome back video from 2019. apologies.
So thanks, Jane, and thanks everybody for joining us this evening. And even though we're starting our conversation in 2019, 2021, I'm going to take us back 120 years in my presentation. But I'll start with 2017, which is when really the beginning of construction, the moment of the campus that some of you may recall. Sometimes I have a hard time remembering what it was like even at that moment, but what you see on the screen is sort of the moment we found ourselves when we were really thinking about how we could accommodate growth of programs, co-location of programs on the Danforth campus, an expansion to the art museum. And the way to do that, clearly looking at the image on the screen, was to think differently about the parking. And how do we make our front door, which really was compromised and had been compromised for many, many, many decades, how do we make it a welcoming extension almost of Forest Park, which is directly in the foreground, immediately across the street? How do we better connect to St. Louis? How do we better connect to the community, both from the community to the campus and from the campus to Forest Park? And you can see in the image floating above Lindell Boulevard, the significant sea of parking and the significant barriers and problems that it created, conflicts between pedestrians, cars, buses, and bicycles. And really just, we really did have a problem. Not only did we need to accommodate growth, think about our future, but how do we make a more welcoming front door? Next, please. So where we are today, and this is still a rendering because we have a little bit of construction left to do, and these trees show some years of growth when they're not quite as bushy as they are rendered in this image. But this really is the notion of bringing park to the front door of the university, creating really 7 new projects that together make up this transformation. And we'll talk a little bit about all of them, and doing it in an overarching, sustainable, welcoming, contemporary, and adaptable and flexible way. And we've learned a lot about the need to be flexible and adaptable in the last year, and sort of what we did in the East End really did help us actually think about how to accommodate those who were on campus in the past year. And there's a lot of lessons that we took from the Hilltop campus that we applied to the planning of the East End that have really served us well. We're eager to get back to some sense of normalcy at the East End, but we'll talk more about that as we proceed. Next, please. So again, 121 years ago was a national competition that reached out to the most significant, impactful, and famous architects of the time. These are ones that have worked on many campuses and many different public parks and different sites throughout the country, throughout the world. These are Carrera and Hastings, McKimmey and White, many buildings that you would be aware of, and many campuses that you would be aware of. Cope and Stewardson, though, came with a very different scheme, with a collegiate Gothic scheme that is quite different from the more Beaux-Arts, symmetrical, sort of hierarchically planned. If you think about sort of a campus of MIT or UVA or Columbia, which are very symmetrical and very much, if you do something on the east side, you need to do the same thing on the west side. And we have moments of that symmetry on our campus, especially around Brookings. But as you move further west, and really as you move further east from Brookings with the Sam Fox School on the south and the McKelvey School of Engineering on the north, there were very significant differences between our style of the architecture, but also the massing and the placement of our buildings really broke down that symmetry. And we're grateful, and I continue to be grateful, and those who work on our campus look back to 1900, this competition entry from Cope and Stewardson, which won the competition, thankfully, at that time, and really has served us well for over 120 years. Next, please. Over the decades, though, there was quite a lot of ad hoc changes that happened at the East End. You all recognize Brookings. This building on the lower left was part of the World's Fair that sort of remained up until into the 20s, which was the the British Pavilion as part of the World's Fair. But you can see there really wasn't a plan for the East End, east of Brookings, as there was for the West. Over the decades, in the 40s, buildings were Givens and Bixby were built, which were really neoclassical. They were not the red Missouri granite. They were a different architectural style. They were a different form. They were different sort of setup of what a building vocabulary could be at the East End. But you can see even in the late 40s, parking lots sort of ad hoc emerged as really the significant portion of the East End. And that continued through the future decades. In the 80s, and many of you probably remember when Steinberg and Bixby and Givens were the three Sam Fox buildings on the East End, and the north side, there were no engineering buildings yet there. There was just a very, very large parking with some open space. The alley in the middle leading to Brookings from Lindell, you can see was getting quite overgrown in a way, even though it really the framed view of Brookings was really getting compromised as early as the mid-1980s. In 2011, when 3 buildings had been completed, as the engineering school incrementally was moving, or it continues to move in steps from the Hilltop campus to the 3 buildings, Green, Brower, and Whitaker. On the right side, they were done and have been designed in extremely consistent collegiate Gothic style. And also on the south side, you can see that Walker and the Kemper Art Museum were also added to the complement of buildings on the south side. So, but again, ad hoc. Parking lots were the front door. Parking lots very much separated engineers, artists, and architects. And that really wasn't serving well our cross-disciplinary initiatives that were underway. So in 2015, when we really got going on the planning for the East End, this is what we found. This was our challenge. This was our challenge, and this was our opportunity. Clearly, a big part of the solution was finding a place for the parking. Next, please. So for many years, and it's 2013, we really started the planning per se for the East End. And what we did, rather than start with the architecture and the buildings, we started with, and many of you who are in the design professions would sort of understand the difference between a master plan and a framework plan. And the framework plan sort of laid out a campus that really was created by the open spaces. And the buildings were, much as the Hilltop campus, the buildings were the elements that created outdoor space. And that framework in 2013 led to a more detailed campus plan for the East End, for what the buildings can be. And you can get a hint of the pavilions. You can see the 2 glassy elements flanking Brookings, and that really became part of the entire concept of how the East End would be designed and what the architectural style would be that reflected well and created good context, both for Brookings and for the Sam Fox buildings and the School of Engineering buildings. Many, many groups were involved in thinking about how we organized ourselves to undertake such a large, complicated project. There were multiple schools involved, really the leadership of Mark Wrighton as chancellor, Hank Weber as executive vice chancellor for administration, and an ad hoc group of trustees who really brought with them the charge of stewarding the campus over the decades and making decisions that would serve us well over time. And that ad hoc committee really was the design leadership and the sort of oversight committee that helped guide the project. Many different subcommittees and details about, as you can see, parking and transportation, mobility, how we communicated out to the community and to ourselves what the impact of this project would have on our daily lives for a couple of years during construction and post-construction, and then how the construction was managed and how the architects and design teams were managed. So a very complicated, purpose-built set of structural organization for this project. And this is the plan, and a little bit later on after we're going to go through the construction, but I'm also going to give you a couple of slides, a little update on the buildings. The buildings in white with the names on them are the projects of this, of the East End transformation. What isn't shown, other than the dashed line that reflects the underground parking structure, you can see that that sort of ties together the campus, both from an accessibility point of view and from an access point of view in terms of shuttles, buses, and vehicular parking. So we'll go through those in a little bit more detail after we go through some of the construction, which was really the fascinating part of, I mean, for me, the design has been a fascinating process, and I'm sharing very much the finished product, but I think Jane's going to share some unique moments that really will only happen once in the design, in the construction of this project, which was a fascinating and complicated series of events.
Thanks, Jamie. Yes, as he mentioned, that how we communicated what was happening in the project and the disruption to our everyday life was a very major component of the work that I did for the first couple of years while at the university. This photograph here is commencement day of May 2017. Shovels went in the ground the very next day. We're going to show a couple of slides that highlight the construction over the course of 2 years, and we'll end with a quick time-lapse video that shows start to finish what happened. This picture from June 17th was just as we were beginning the mass excavation of the parking garage. You can still see that Brookings Drive was still the way in and the way out, even for the construction vehicles. We worked 6 days a week from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. With truckloads of dirt leaving the site. Approximately 1 truck left every minute during that time period, so over 1,000 trucks a day. A big portion of my time then was spent talking about how dirty the road was and how much traffic we were generating, so I was glad when it was over in a quick 100 days. This from October of 2017 shows the bottom level of the parking garage in the middle, which there are 2 levels of the garage that were both designed with flat floors, so the ramp is in the middle, and that's what you see. To the left is the future home of Jubel Hall, and on the right-hand side is WEIL. The closest to the distance along Skinker, there's a pile of dirt that was deemed Mount McKelvey for the first portion of the project. Some building materials were saved dirt was saved during the excavation phase and was used as infill later on in the project. Jumping ahead quite a bit, October 2018 shows the progress in the garage. It was poured from west to east over the course of the winter. You'll see on the left, Jubel, on the right, WEIL with the steel frame going up. At this point in time, construction on McKelvey had not yet begun. A little bit further along, more process on the garage. We poured over 50,000 cubic yards of concrete over the course of the project. Oh, and one of my fun facts, I apologize, going back to the excavation phase, how much dirt did we move for the completion of the parking garage? 330,000 cubic yards of dirt were removed from the East End site. What does that equate in terms of measurement that we shared with our student population? That was 450 million venti Starbucks coffees, or 4.5 million kegs of beer. January 2019, approaching the deadline, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, the Brookings steps have begun to reappear, the 2 glass pavilions on either side, the pathways through Tisch Park and the foundations for the fountains, as well as construction on McKelvey Hall has begun off in the distance. The winter of 2019 was not particularly kind to us with our tight deadline of commencement 2019. So a large tent was erected between the 2 pavilions to allow for work on the pavers for the central court area to happen no matter the weather, snow, or temperature. And that allowed us to meet our deadline of completion for commencement 2019. This is the day in May of 2019, and we're going to watch a quick video showing the 2 years of the construction through a time-lapse video from the perspective of Brookings Hall. That was an incredibly quick trip through all of the construction over 2 years, but I'm going to get to turn it back over to Jamie now for talk about the project awards and recognition and look at some of the finished spaces.
Yeah, and so thanks, Jane. And you see at the completion of the project, so we really have been widely recognized from a whole set of different audiences about the success both of the design, of the landscape, and of the construction, from AIA, from the Society of College and University Planners, General Contractors Associations. And I know Phil will talk in much more detail about the LEED Platinum certification that we've received for 4 of the buildings that you've seen. And that is a very significant achievement, especially in the Midwest, to have concurrent buildings that all meet LEED Platinum as part of one project. So we will, as I say, Phil, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Next, please. In addition to the recognition, we also got some great press coverage, which is always nice to get WashU in the national, if not international press, and primarily architectural press, but also in the Post-Dispatch. But getting a cover story in Architect Magazine was really great. And they really focused on the sustainability features of the development. And then you can see some of the other periodicals where we were featured. And the press was really quite interested in capturing our project from many different viewpoints. And as Jane mentioned, you sort of saw the mess of the big hole, but here are the 2 levels of the parking facility that together connect to the buildings that surround it, which really gives us accessibility and access to most of the buildings, if not all of the buildings in the East End, but also could be adaptively reused in the future given the flat floors and high ceilings. And it also, from the start, we really wanted wayfinding and clarity of how you get, if you're a visitor coming from for admissions or coming to go to an event at the Kemper Museum or something else, that you really want to maintain your wayfinding clarity. And there's nothing more confusing than parking structures that have angled floors, and you sort of get out of your car at level 1.5 and don't know quite where the elevator is. So from the beginning, the notion of having a flat floor with direct access to the buildings adjacent was really a high priority for us, because underground parking structures really can be disorienting, and we've done a lot to ensure that this structure is not disorienting. You can see how this really is, in a sense, a very, very large green roof that covers the parking structure, which is in the area of about 900 cars. And you can see that the slope of the ceiling of the parking structure actually follows the Brookings Hill, so that you get a significantly high ceiling the further west you go and the closer to Brookings you are in the parking structure. Next, please. What holds it all together is the park, is Tisch Park. And Tisch Park really is conceived as being a community place, as I described earlier, with significant sculptures from the Steinberg-Weil Sculpture Garden, seen on the left side, on the south part of this photograph, with movable chairs, which you see scattered throughout, learning from other parks and other campuses that really inspired us to create a place that would be very welcoming to students, very welcoming to the community at large, and a variety of scales of spaces. You see smaller courtyards, alleys of trees, smaller lawns, etc. And I noticed in the chat, and it's an important question, and this is a good slide to talk about, why are the 2 pavilions, the buildings flanking Brookings, why are they not collegiate Gothic, and why are they glass? And this was, believe me, a big conversation with the trustees and others and the architects about how can we be the most respectful of Brookings Hall, not copy Brookings Hall, but frame Brookings Hall in a contemporary way and be a campus that will take us for the future century and not necessarily look back. We also had the reality of the architectural style of the right side of our screen, which was the School of Engineering, which has the Missouri red granite and the limestone, and the left side of our screen, which is a very different era, very different materials, very different color palette. And how could we mediate and not have this clashing sort of conversation that you would have seen on this screen between what was happening on the right, what was happening on the left, and then the historic Brookings at the termination of this park. And the notion is that these pavilions, these relatively small, relative to the buildings adjacent to it, lower glass pavilions that still reflected the verticality of some of the context, but that what was so great about them, and you'll see in the future pictures, is that the views from within the pavilions of the surrounding buildings really created quite an experience for visitors. The admissions on the left, food service, and some academic and sustainability programs on the right, that the views from the pavilions looking out at the surrounding campus, at the park, and at the historic buildings was really something we wanted to feature and treasure. Next. So just a quick tour around, quickly looking at each of the buildings. Weill Hall for Sam Fox School of Art and Architecture programs accommodated within this building. It's primarily a studio and a teaching building for a very, very crowded Givens that we had found ourselves in. Inside, the Weill Hall has sort of a heart where the students, faculty, and visitors come together in Keener Court, which has a green wall that sort of creates a very pleasant and welcoming courtyard within the building that is filled with students when students were on campus in numbers that they were when these photographs were taken. Next, please. Kemper Art Museum, which didn't really have a very welcoming entrance, to be honest, on the north side, if you remember what it was like. So how do we make a welcoming, transparent facade lobby, which is the right side of the Kemper Art Museum, with a beautiful Saraceno work hanging within the lobby, and then the pleated stainless steel facade, which is quite a bold move that really only a museum maybe be able to accommodate. But how do we have a museum that creates a gallery space that has limited natural daylight and really has the curatorial and conservation protocols met for the art that is displayed, but also provides an animated, light-filled facade? And you know, this is a bold move, but it's been pretty well received by many. The way the new gallery, #1, can display a lot more works from the permanent collection, have glimpses of the campus through some smaller windows, but really making the Kemper a much more welcoming and clearly public-facing structure. McKelvey School of Engineering is on the north side, and in this drone photograph taken relatively recently, you can see Jubel Hall on the left, McKelvey Hall on the right, and then the buildings that were there when we started the project: Whitaker, Brower, and Green. And I'll talk a little bit about both Jubel Hall and McKelvey Hall in a minute, but this is really the next iteration of creating a court and a place for engineering. And Jubel Hall, sorry, Jane. So Jubel Hall, you can see on its ground floor, has a lot of transparency that opens up to a makerspace. And we really wanted to display the great work that material science and mechanical engineering faculty and staff and students are working on, and you can see here, but that it's open to the park, that it's open to visitors, that really there's a sense of activity within the building that you sense when you're outside of the building. And this has become sort of a beloved multidisciplinary makerspace that attracts artists and architects to use it, and others from the campus, not just the engineering students. McKelvey Hall is recently completed. McKelvey Hall came about a year after the beginning of the project, and it was just completed about a month or so ago. And McKelvey Hall is interesting in that it has sort of both architectures in it. It has the curtain wall, transparent, glassy facade facing the court, and the more traditional collegiate Gothic. And part of that really is to create a space that both is respectful of the historic context of the university, but also creates, this is computer science, that creates a place that is not too different from the types of workplaces where some of our students and graduates would be working once they do graduate. So how do we do both the collegiate Gothic context, but the more contemporary loft-like engineering labs? And inside in particular, very flexible spaces, very light-filled, airy, sort of loft-like completely furniture-based interior research space for the computer scientists, with great views out to the landscape as well. And then Summers Welcome Center, as I mentioned, this is our new home of undergraduate admissions. This is sort of the first point of arrival for so many visitors to campus, with Brookings directly up the hill. So you're always aware of Brookings, but that you're accommodated and welcomed in really a purpose-built admissions welcome center that has the right presentation rooms and meeting rooms and interview suites, the large presentation room here with the AV technologies, and as I mentioned earlier, the views of Brookings and the views of Tisch Park from that. One of our greatest, what we've learned from interviews from visiting students is that once we get that student on campus and they experience the campus, that's really when we got them and when they want to come to WashU. And so we really wanted to play up the tours of the campus and create a great starting point and ending point to begin the tours of the admissions visitors. And that happens in this room. In SCHNUCK Pavilion, I'm going to turn it over to Phil in the next slide, but just this is the flanking pavilion to Summers Welcome Center. And from day one, the notion of having food amenities and a place to have a cup of coffee, grab breakfast, lunch, snacks, sit inside, sit outside, was really the genesis of the idea for the SCHNUCK Pavilion. But we also didn't want to only have a food service building. And Phil and his team and environmental studies, and he'll describe a little bit how that occupying the pavilion is really a great opportunity to mix academic programs, operational programs, and a really student-focused community generator of the SCHNUCK Pavilion and the Parkside Cafe that you can see here. So Phil, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jamie. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be with you. Jane, if you wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide. So one of the really critical things that the SCHNUCK Pavilion has enabled is the co-location of the Office of Sustainability, which I lead, which is an administrative entity, and Environmental Studies, which is an interdisciplinary academic program. And the co-location of these two has really been transformational. Our staff and faculty are seeing each other all throughout the day. Well, not during COVID. We see each other on Zoom quite a bit. Our students are able to mingle. And the building literally sits at the intersection of 4 of our academic schools: Arts and Sciences, the MCKELVEY School of Engineering, the Sam Fox School of Design, and the Brown School of Social Work. So it's been this wonderful physical nexus, and it's also created a foundation for much more collaboration within our program. And this is just a shot of our intern team a couple of summers ago in front of the building. Next slide, please. One of the East End sustainability stories that I want to touch on is the Brookings trees. So as everyone knows, we had this alley of trees, as Jamie mentioned, through time had grown together and was partially obscuring the view of Brookings. To enable the East End project, those trees needed to be removed. And we wanted to do it in a way that really honored the history and the character of the university. So we went around tree by tree and assessed, and were able to harvest wood from about 30, I think roughly 30 trees. We ended up having a local mill all the wood. We took it out to Tyson to dry the wood. And then a fair amount of the wood has found its way into the East End, and we actually have quite a bit more that we're using in other locations. So this is one of the desks. This is actually my desk in the SCHNUCK Pavilion, made out of that historic Brookings oak. Next slide. So when Avik kicked us off, he also mentioned that the university is now, or the Danforth campus is now a gold level bicycle friendly university. We are the first gold level bike friendly university in Missouri, and we're one of only a small number within the broader Midwest. The East End really significantly contributed to that. So I'd like to touch on a couple of the elements that helped get us, bring us to the next level. Go ahead, Jane, next slide. So one of the new amenities is in the lower level of the SCHNUCK Pavilion. It's an active commuter hub, and it is intended to support those that are getting to campus on foot, on bike, on transit, who need a place to store clothing, to shower, to change. So the active commuter hub has a series of showers, It has dedicated lockers as well as day use lockers. And it's got a bike part vending machine. So if someone was to bike to campus and they get a flat, well, they can head into the active commuter hub and they can get a new tube, fix their bike, and head on home. In fact, they can fix it with a fix-it station that sits just outside the building that has tools and a pump as part of the station. Next slide. The other thing that I'd like to highlight is the East End gave us this opportunity to develop a new legibility for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So Matt Bernstein, one of the co-hosts, has really led this effort for the university. And you'll see the two pathways that are heading towards Brookings have a darker surface and a lighter surface. So the new campus legibility is the slightly darker surface is the bicycle surface. The lighter surface is the pedestrian surface. As you remember from time on campus, we are a very pedestrian-centric campus. So as the campus has grown, both in population and really the distances our students have to travel, bikes are becoming even more important, not just to get to campus, but to get around campus. So it presented a series of opportunities to think through how do we bring in new infrastructure that helps increase the safety through campus and the accessibility as people travel through campus, now with much more mixing of bikes and pedestrians. Next slide, please. Another one of the sustainability stories of the East End is that the parking garage is pursuing PARKSMART certification. So like LEED is a third-party certification system for sustainable buildings, PARKSMART is a third-party certification for sustainable garages. And this image is showing WEIL Hall and this sunken courtyard, which is connected to the upper level of the garage. And it's a really beautiful moment where, if you've come in, you're a visitor and you're looking for your pathway out of the garage, you look off to into one direction and you see this beautiful area with greenery that invites you out. So another interesting thing you'll see in this picture is in the middle of the picture on the ground, there's a nurse log. So that's actually one of the Brookings trees that the landscape architect team envisioned as a living part of the landscape. We have historically the university has very manicured landscapes, and part of our sustainability story is we're transitioning many of those landscapes to native landscapes that have much more texture, much more variability. And what I love about this is a little ecological moment where we've placed the old tree on the ground, and the intent is to let that tree do what it will do, decompose and become a place for habitat. Next slide, please. So a couple of things I wanted to mention. So there's many design elements that include this interplay between the natural spaces and the built spaces. And it's a different approach than we've taken in other parts of the campus, but it's becoming really the campus approach now, is to have much more of connectivity between indoors and outdoor spaces. The East End also has some really significant stormwater management stories. So throughout, there's a series of different rain gardens. We also have a 30,000 gallon cistern that collects and recirculates stormwater runoff that we use for irrigation of the East End. And we also have a detention system on the East End that slows down the flow of stormwater into the combined sewer system. That's one of our significant regional issues, is we still have an old combined stormwater and sewer system. So major rain events overwhelm the system, and we actually end up getting raw sewage that heads into local waterways. So these types of strategies are really critical strategies for helping mitigate that. Next slide, please. So the first day that I came to campus to move into the SCHNUCK Pavilion building, I was walking up to the door, and on the left, I saw this enormous dragonfly. And it was the first time that I'd seen a dragonfly on the East End of the campus. Jamie showed the pictures of the East End, prior to the project. There was quite a bit of parking, and it wasn't the space that really kind of spoke ecology. Well, in this image to the right is one of the rain gardens, and really all throughout, as we've been touching on, there's many ecological moments. And to me, this was a sign, you know, it was a little, if you build it, they will come sign. And it was a great way to be welcomed to the new East End and to our building. Next slide, please. So I'll touch on just a few high-level things. So from an energy use perspective, the buildings on the East End were designed to be between 30 and about 40% better than ASHRAE 90.1 2010, which is basically a energy code. So they're quite a bit more efficient than a code building. There's also a lot of thought put into how the buildings can adapt through future changes to program within the spaces. Relisha Tiwari on our team, our sustainable design and construction project manager, has really led the way on thinking about healthy materials within the spaces. So she worked closely with a number of other team members to ensure that the furniture that was brought into the space is compliant with the Healthier Hospitals Initiative. And then finally, as Jamie mentioned, we were targeting LEED Gold for the project, and 4 of them have been awarded LEED Platinum, and pretty much near simultaneous. In addition, one of our historic renovations on campus, January Hall, received LEED Platinum at almost exactly the same time. We're really proud of this. One LEED Platinum project is quite an undertaking, and to have 5 of them come in at the same time was a real point of pride for us. Next slide. One of the things that enabled it is solar. So both on-site solar as well as solar at North Campus. So this is actually an image of our North Campus site. So you can tell it's a much larger footprint than the East End buildings. But LEED allows institutions to basically take a campus approach where you develop on-site, but you also have the opportunity to develop additional renewable energy assets somewhere within your sort of general campus footprint where it makes the most sense. And as we were evaluating our opportunities, North Campus was one of our biggest roofs. So we developed quite a large solar array at North Campus, and there's this really nice interplay of the North Campus solar project as well as the East End project. And next slide. So I want to share the big greenhouse gas story for the university and how the East End fits. So what you're seeing in this graph is the university has grown consistently from 1990 on the left through 2020 on the right. And the dotted blue line is that growth in square footage. The red line is our carbon emissions, and those consistently were growing through about 2010. We set our first carbon reduction goal in 2010, and we worked really aggressively to achieve that goal. So what you see, the divergent red and the green lines, the red line is if we assume that nothing about how electricity on the grid is generated has changed. So red from 1990 to 2020 assumes that the grid has been the same level of carbon intensity. The green line basically takes credit for some of that greening of the grid. We have very intentionally been electrifying many things on campus. So things that used to run on natural gas, some are now running on electricity. And for the East End, we have a series of heat recovery chillers that are able to capture what would otherwise be waste heat to provide heat. And what that's allowed us to do is to decrease natural gas usage, or effectively stop combusting natural gas for a pretty significant portion of the year, thanks to those heat recovery chillers. So if you would press forward, Jane. So if we just look at 2010 forward, the key story is that we've decoupled emissions and growth. And even as the East End has come online, we've continued to decrease our campus emissions. Next. So our gross square foot is up 13% in that 10-year time range. And next again, our emissions are down 22%. And we're continuing to really drive deeper emission reductions. Next slide. And we end with that beautiful rendering of the East End. So I think here we're going to turn it back over to Avik for the question and answers. So over to you, Avik.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Phil, Jane, and James. So we've got a few questions from the audience now. And so we've got some in the chat box here. We have some that we received before we started. I know we're also going to cover some in our extended Q&A if you're joining us there. So let's start with an easy one. How many levels are there in the underground garage?
2. Yeah.
All right.
It's an easy one, but you know, as we said, it was. I mean, somebody. I'm reading ahead to another question. I'll just tie it back to this about are there things we wished we would have done that the scope items that we spent months and months and months thinking about how many cars are the right number of cars to accommodate in this garage, and the deeper you go, the significantly more expensive you are. And the fact is, we reduced the number of cars in the East End with the garage versus what was in the surface parking by a few hundred. And there were moments where there were people worried that, like, how can you take away spaces? It's going to be, it's not going to serve our demand. And so I think I'm sort of thankful sometimes for the opportunity to have value engineering or scope reduction, or having a budget that limits us, that sometimes helps push us to be more aggressive in certain areas. And I think we were purposefully aggressive in reducing the number of spaces that we allocated to the East End, not spending the many millions of dollars we would have needed to go deeper, but also encouraging people to bike or walk or take public transit. So I think I'm glad we only have 2 levels, and we looked at 2.5, we looked at 3, we looked at many different iterations of how deep this garage was.
Awesome. And so just to close up that second question there, so it sounds like parking was a huge part of that, right? Going underground and thinking about, okay, on the future, what will this be used for? And I know you may talk about that a little more, but was there anything from a design perspective that you felt, there was a concession from a budgetary perspective?
I'd be curious what Phil and Jane think. And there were so many things that were considered, and we knew this was going to be, for many decades, if not centuries, our future. So our leadership, our trustees, really didn't want us to make any mistakes, not compromise, not go overboard, be appropriate, but also not make mistakes that we're going to regret. Because once you don't do something in a project like this, it's very unlikely you're going to come back to do it. So there are probably some little things I'm missing, but I think in general, the things that really were important to this project, we designed and built. Now, it didn't mean we weren't efficient and looked for the appropriate ways to build them or to design them or to incorporate them, but there were, the leadership really didn't want us to make short-sighted decisions, which is an academic campus. We have that luxury because we're thinking long-term. We're not thinking for the next 3 to 5 years. We're thinking for the next 30 to 50 years, if not longer. So as I say, there may have been some little things, but I think in general, we were able to do what we thought was right.
No, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you, Jamie. So going to a question that maybe is a little more timely and one we got before the start of the event. In light of the pandemic, was there anything you would have done differently during the East End transformation design process?
Someone else want to take a stab? I'm happy to.
Sure, I'll take a stab. I think things that we've learned this year are that the buildings really are flexible, and we have still been able to use them with modified density and capacity. And we've added additional outdoor furniture to the park setting. Obviously, there are not all 4 seasons available in St. Louis for using that to gather physically distanced outside, but we've definitely seen more students coming to the East End to spend time at observing public health principles together, and also the layouts of the buildings, the use of furniture, a lot of flexible spaces, so that we've still been able to have instruction in person in those spaces.
Fantastic. So a couple questions we're going to tie together here. So how thick is the layer of dirt over the roof on the parking deck? Is there a danger of roots growing down into the concrete? And tied into this as well, are there any restrictions in the number of people who can gather on that green space? Can you hold large scale events there?
Well, so the dirt, I mean, the engineering of the soil and the depth of the soil and the root structure of the species of trees that were selected was all extremely detailed and I mean, we asked the same questions, exactly those questions. But this is why we engaged with really renowned landscape architects and soil engineers and civil engineers who specified the appropriate tree and the appropriate soil and the appropriate structural system and all the layers of waterproofing on top of the structural system of the lid of the garage to ensure us that these trees will, because we have some trees that are not on top of the garage and they're part of the LA and others that are on top of the garage. And we don't want in 30 years, the trees to be different heights or different, different success in terms of their growth. So we were a lot of scientific analysis of how we could ensure that both structurally and in terms of the growth for decades that we would not have a problem in the future. I think it's about 2 to 4 feet of soil, of engineered soil, generally on top of the garage. Do we have events on top of it? We sure do. We had a great event right before, well, Jane, when that would have been the beginning of the semester?
Back to school 2019.
Yeah.
So the tradition of convocation. Now you start in the field house and you walk from the west side of campus through to the east end through the Brookings Arch, and there is a stage and a band, and first year students and their families gather for a fun festive evening. We had a really lovely night for that in 2019, and we're looking forward to doing it again when it is deemed safe.
All right.
But the structure is absolutely designed to accommodate all different types of events moving forward. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And we are just running out of time here, and we'll run into our extended Q&A for those who are joining us. Once again, wanted to thank you, Jane, Phil, and James, for not only your presentation, your fun behind the scenes stories and images through the whole process, and just for sharing your expertise with us. It's been a truly fascinating hour, and attendees, thank you all for joining us today. If you have suggestions for other alumni or parent speakers, or would like to be featured yourself in a WashU event, please email alumniassociation@woostel.edu. Additionally, we encourage you to visit the digital resources and virtual connection page on our website to learn about other ways to connect with WashU alumni, students, and faculty. This page is updated regularly, and the link will be in our chat shortly. And once again, if you chose to join for the extended and more technical Q&A session, we've got 10 more questions waiting right here for our speakers. Please reference your confirmation email that you received for the correct Zoom meeting link, and I'll begin in just a few moments. Thanks everyone for joining, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.